The shattered glass embedded in Chelsea Morris's palm glittered under the kitchen fluorescence, tiny diamonds of pain that she barely registered. The coffee mug lay in pieces across the tile floor, dark liquid seeping into the grout lines, while her daughter's words hung in the air like poison gas. "I wish you had died instead of him." Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I start my story, I would love to know what city you are joining me from. Feel free to share it in the comments. Now, let me immerse you in this story. Chelsea's knees buckled. Her free hand shot out, gripping the counter edge as her vision tunneled. Blood dripped from her clenched fist, pattering onto the broken ceramic shards below. The refrigerator hummed its oblivious melody. Outside, a neighbor's lawnmower roared to life. Everything continued as if the world hadn't just collapsed. She forced her eyes upward. Her daughter stood 5 feet away, chest heaving, tears streaming down 17-year-old cheeks flushed with rage and grief. The college acceptance letter crumpled in the girl's grip, the one from Howard University, the one Chelsea had saved for 3 years to help afford, the one that arrived 6 months to the day after the accident. Chelsea's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. Her jaw worked uselessly. The blood flow from her palm increased, running down her wrist now, soaking into her sleeve. She needed to move, to respond, to do something other than stand there bleeding and drowning in her daughter's hatred. "Say something!" The words exploded from the girl's throat, raw and jagged. Chelsea unwrapped her fingers from the counter. She stumbled backward 2 steps, then 3, her shoes crunching on porcelain fragments. Her shoulder blade struck the doorframe leading to the hallway. The impact sent a jolt through her body that somehow reconnected her brain to her limbs. She spun and ran. Her feet pounded up the carpeted stairs, each step driving the glass deeper into her palm. The pain spread up her forearm in hot waves. Behind her, she heard sobbing, wrenching, desperate sounds that might have been apologies or might have been more curses. Chelsea didn't stop to determine which. She couldn't. If she stopped moving, she would shatter completely, and there would be no putting those pieces back together. The master bedroom door slammed behind her. She twisted the lock with trembling fingers, leaving blood smears on the brass. Her legs gave out. She slid down the wood panel until her spine hit carpet, knees drawn to her chest. The injured hand throbbed in rhythm with her racing heartbeat. Through the door, footsteps climbed the stairs. They paused outside. Chelsea held her breath, every muscle rigid. A soft thump, forehead against wood maybe, or palm pressed flat in mirror image of her own bloodied hand. Then the footsteps retreated. A door down the hall clicked shut with devastating finality. Chelsea's head fell back against the door. The ceiling fan rotated overhead in lazy circles, its chain clicking with each revolution. She raised her injured hand, examining the damage with clinical detachment. 3 pieces of porcelain protruded from the meat of her palm. The largest, near her thumb joint, had penetrated deep. She needed tweezers, antiseptic, bandages. She needed her husband. The photograph on the nightstand caught her peripheral vision. She turned her head slowly, as if moving through water. His face smiled back at her. That crooked grin she'd fallen in love with 20 years ago, captured at last summer's barbecue. Before the rain. Before the highway. Before the semi-truck ran the red light at the intersection of Route 40 and destroyed everything. Chelsea pressed her good hand against her mouth, stifling the sound trying to claw its way out. Her shoulders shook. Hot tears tracked down her face, dripping off her jaw onto her collar. But she made no noise. She had become expert at silent grief these past 6 months, crying in grocery store bathrooms and parking lots and locked bedrooms while her daughter raged through the house like a wounded animal. Chelsea pushed herself upright, legs trembling as she stood. Blood from her palm had smeared across the door, leaving rust-colored streaks in the white paint. She'd have to clean that before... Before what? Before her daughter saw? Before she pretended everything was manageable, containable, fixable? The bathroom mirror reflected a stranger. Mascara carved dark channels down her cheeks. Her silk blouse, the expensive one she'd bought for parent-teacher conferences, hung wrinkled and stained. She turned on the faucet, watching pink-tinged water spiral down the drain as she rinsed her hand. The porcelain shards shifted under the stream, sending fresh bolts of pain up her arm. Her fingers found the tweezers in the medicine cabinet. The first shard came out clean, a thin triangle no bigger than her thumbnail. She dropped it into the sink with a tiny clink. The second required digging, her hand cramping as she probed the wound. Sweat beaded on her upper lip. The third piece had lodged deep. She gripped the exposed edge, counting backward from 10. At 7, she pulled. Her vision whited out for a heartbeat. The shard came free, trailing a ribbon of blood. She grabbed a towel, pressing hard against the wound until the worst of the bleeding stopped. Footsteps in the hallway again. Different this time. Deliberate. Heavy. Chelsea's hand froze halfway to the bandages. The footsteps stopped at her door. "I'm going to Aunt Patricia's." Her daughter's voice came through muffled, flat. No emotion. No inflection. Just words delivered like a weather report. Chelsea's throat constricted. She stared at her reflection, watching her mouth try to form a response. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating as smoke. Okay. One word, that's all she could manage. One pathetic syllable while her daughter stood on the other side of the door, close enough to touch, if only 6 inches of wood didn't separate them like a canyon wall. More footsteps. These descended the stairs rapidly, each thud deliberate. The front door opened, slammed. The windows rattled in their frames. Chelsea sank onto the closed toilet lid. Her hands shook as she wound gauze around her palm, pulling it tight with her teeth to secure the end. The white fabric immediately bloomed red at the center. She'd wrapped it too loose. She unwound it, started again, hands steadier this time through sheer force of will. Her phone buzzed on the bathroom counter. She picked it up, squinting at the screen. A text from her sister. Patricia's message glowed in the dim light. "She just got here, crying, says you two had a fight. Want me to send her home?" Chelsea's thumb hovered over the keyboard. The cursor blinked. She typed 3 different responses, deleted them all. Her sister was waiting. Her daughter was waiting. The whole damn world seemed to be waiting for her to say something. Do something. Fix something that couldn't be fixed. She set the phone face down without responding. The bedroom felt cavernous when she emerged. Shadows pooled in the corners despite the afternoon sun slanting through the blinds. She moved to the nightstand, her hand reaching automatically for the photograph. Her fingers stopped an inch from the frame. She couldn't look at his face right now. Couldn't bear that frozen smile, that moment of joy preserved while everything around it crumbled to dust. Instead, she turned toward the master closet. His clothes still hung there, organized by color the way he'd always insisted. Navy suits, white dress shirts, the leather jacket he'd worn on their first date. She hadn't touched any of it. Couldn't bring herself to box it up, donate it, erase the physical evidence that he'd existed. Her daughter thought that was pathetic. Had said so, actually, 3 weeks ago, during their last real conversation before the silence descended. "You're building a shrine," she'd spat. "Like if you keep everything exactly the same, he'll just walk back through the door." Chelsea's hand closed around the leather jacket. The material felt cold, stiff from months of disuse. She pulled it from the hanger, the metal hook scraping against the wooden rod, with a sound that seemed too loud in the empty house. The jacket carried his scent still, faint now, almost imaginary, cedar and coffee, and something uniquely him that no cologne could replicate. She pressed the leather to her face, breathed in. Her shoulders began to shake before she registered the tears coming. The jacket muffled the sound when she finally broke, the kind of raw sobbing that came from somewhere deep in her chest, the kind she'd learned to suppress when her daughter was around. The closet floor rose up to meet her knees. She didn't remember deciding to sit, but suddenly she was there, surrounded by his shoes, his belts, the tie rack he'd installed himself because the one she'd bought wasn't optimized for efficiency. Her fingers traced the edge of a brown leather loafer. Size 11. He'd worn these to Aaliyah's middle school graduation. The name pierced through her grief like a blade. Aaliyah, her daughter, their daughter. Chelsea's phone buzzed in her pocket. Once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. She didn't need to look to know it was Patricia again, demanding an answer, demanding some kind of decision about what to do with the teenage girl currently crying in her aunt's guest room. She shoved the phone deeper into her pocket without checking. Her hand found the jacket again, gripping it so tightly her knuckles went white. The leather creaked under the pressure. She wanted to rip it, wanted to shred something, break something, make the external world reflect the destruction inside her chest. Instead, she carefully folded the jacket, smoothing out each wrinkle with deliberate precision. The walk to the garage felt like moving through water. Each step required conscious effort. The overhead light flickered twice before catching, illuminating the space where his car used to park. Her sedan sat alone now, covered in a fine layer of dust. She hadn't driven it in 2 weeks, hadn't left the house except for the grocery store run last Monday, and even then she'd barely made it through the checkout line before the panic started clawing up her throat. The metal shelves along the wall held boxes, holiday decorations, old tax returns, photo albums she'd promised herself she'd digitize someday. She grabbed the step stool and positioned it beneath the highest shelf, where a large plastic container sat collecting dust. Her hands trembled as she pulled it down, the weight of it making her arms strain. Inside, carefully wrapped in tissue paper, lay Aaliyah's baby clothes. Chelsea lifted out a tiny yellow onesie, the fabric impossibly small in her hands. Had her daughter ever been this fragile? This dependent? The girl who'd looked at her yesterday with such venom seemed like a completely different species from the infant who'd once fit in this scrap of cotton. She found the hospital bracelet next. Baby Girl Morris, 7 lbs 3 Oz. The plastic felt brittle between her fingers, ready to snap. Beneath it, a card. "Congratulations on your beautiful daughter," signed by nurses whose names she'd forgotten. Beneath that, the ultrasound photo where Aaliyah was nothing but shadows and promise. Chelsea's phone erupted with a call. Patricia's name flashed across the screen. This time, Chelsea answered. "She wants to come home," Patricia said without preamble. Chelsea's throat closed. She stared at the onesie in her lap, unable to form words. "Chelsea? Did you hear me?" "I heard you." Her voice came out hoarse, unfamiliar. The silence stretched between them, filled with everything Chelsea couldn't say. The line crackled. Patricia's breathing was audible, patient, but waiting. I need, Chelsea started, then stopped. What did she need? Time? Space? Her daughter? Her husband? Some way to rewind the last 8 months and make different choices. Take a different route home that night, not let him drive because he'd seemed tired. Seemed something that would have prevented the truck from running the red light and stealing half her life in an instant. Chelsea's fingers crushed the hospital bracelet. The plastic edge bit into her palm, leaving a white impression on her skin. She stood abruptly, the box of baby clothes tumbling from her lap and scattering across the hardwood floor. Yellow and pink and blue fabric spread like flower petals around her feet. When? The word scraped out of her throat. Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. Chelsea's free hand found the wall, steadying herself against the vertigo that threatened to pull her down. Through the window, she watched a car pass slowly down the street, its headlights cutting through the gathering dusk. Not a truck, just a sedan. Her breathing normalized slightly. Okay, she managed. Patricia exhaled audibly through the phone. I told her you'd be ready. Don't make a liar out of me, Chelsea. The call ended before Chelsea could respond. She lowered the phone, staring at the blank screen until it went dark. Her reflection stared back from the black glass, distorted and hollow-eyed. She barely recognized herself. The baby clothes still littered the floor. Chelsea knelt and began gathering them mechanically, folding each piece with precision her trembling hands barely managed. The onesie, a pair of booties, a blanket Patricia had crocheted during her pregnancy, the stitches uneven where she'd been learning. Each item went back into the box, layer by layer, until only the ultrasound photo remained. She held it up to the fading light. That grainy shadow had become a 15-year-old girl who wished her dead. The transformation seemed impossible, yet here was the evidence scattered throughout the house. School photos on the mantel showing Aaliyah's progression from gap-toothed child to sullen teenager. Her father's eyes looking out from an increasingly unfamiliar face. Chelsea shoved the photo into the box and sealed it with tape, wrapping the cardboard edges until no air could penetrate. She carried it to the garage and placed it on the highest shelf, behind paint cans and forgotten holiday decorations. Out of sight. The ladder wobbled as she descended, and for one vertiginous moment she wondered what would happen if she fell. Would Aaliyah come to her hospital bed? Would there be grief or relief in those eyes? Back in the kitchen, Chelsea opened the refrigerator. The bright interior revealed nothing useful. Condiments, leftover takeout containers from meals she'd eaten alone, a gallon of milk approaching its expiration date. She needed to shop. Stock the house with food a teenager would actually eat. She grabbed her keys from the counter and headed for the door. The grocery store parking lot was half empty on a Tuesday evening. Chelsea sat in her car for 5 full minutes, watching people emerge with their carts, loading bags into trunks with the casual efficiency of people whose lives made sense. A mother helped 2 small children into car seats. An elderly man carefully placed a single bag in his passenger seat. Normal people doing normal things. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, too bright and clinical. Chelsea grabbed a cart and started down the produce aisle without a plan. Her hands selected items mechanically: apples, bananas, the kind of red grapes Aaliyah used to eat by the handful. Used to, past tense. She didn't know what her daughter liked anymore. The cart filled with educated guesses. Whole grain bread because Aaliyah had gone through a health phase last year. Chocolate chip cookies because that had been a constant. Ingredients for spaghetti because David had always made it on Sundays, his special sauce simmering for hours while he danced around the kitchen to old R&B, pulling Chelsea and Aaliyah into impromptu family waltzes that made them all laugh. Chelsea's vision blurred. She gripped the cart handle, knuckles whitening, and forced her breathing to steady. An older woman pushed past with an apologetic smile, reaching around her for tomatoes. Chelsea moved mechanically onward. In the frozen food section, she stood paralyzed before the ice cream. Vanilla had been David's favorite. Aaliyah had always wanted chocolate with peanut butter swirl. Chelsea's hand hovered between them, unable to choose, unable to move. The cold air from the open freezer case prickled her skin, raising goosebumps along her arms. "Ma'am, are you okay?" A store employee materialized beside her, young and concerned, wearing a green vest. Chelsea forced her hand to grab the chocolate peanut butter swirl and shoved it into her cart. "Fine, thank you." She moved away quickly, her cart's wheels squeaking with each rotation. The sound followed her through every aisle like an accusation. At checkout, she unloaded her items onto the conveyor belt, each one a small prayer that she'd chosen correctly, that these offerings would somehow bridge the chasm between her and her daughter. The cashier scanned each item with mechanical efficiency, the beeps marking time. Chelsea swiped her card and gathered her bags, arms straining under the weight. Outside, darkness had fallen completely. She loaded the trunk and sat again behind the wheel, engine running, heat blasting against the October chill. Her phone showed 8:47 p.m. 14 hours until Aaliyah came home. Chelsea pulled out of the parking lot and drove through streets she'd traveled thousands of times, past the library where she'd taken Aaliyah for story time, past the park where David had taught her to ride a bike, past the intersection where everything had ended. She didn't mean to stop there. Her body made the decision without consulting her brain, pulling to the curb a block away. Chelsea got out and walked to the corner. The traffic light cycled through its colors: red, yellow, green, oblivious and eternal. Skid marks still scarred the asphalt, though traffic and weather had faded them to ghost lines. Chelsea's fingers traced the rough texture of the telephone pole at the corner. Its wood splintered where the impact had shattered the bark. Someone had placed flowers here once. She'd seen them in those first weeks when driving past had been unavoidable. Now only brittle stems remained, zip-tied to the metal post. She crouched down and picked up a piece of bark that had fallen into the gutter, turning it over in her palm. The edges were sharp enough to draw blood. A car horn blared behind her. She jerked upright, dropping the bark fragment. The driver gestured angrily through his windshield, probably wondering why a woman was kneeling in the street at night. Chelsea stumbled back to the sidewalk, her knee throbbing where it had pressed against the asphalt. She returned to her car and drove home on autopilot, barely registering the turns. The house was exactly as she'd left it, lights on in every room, warding off shadows that gathered anyway in the corners. Chelsea carried the grocery bags inside and unpacked them with methodical precision. Soup cans lined up in the pantry, ice cream into the freezer, bread on the counter. Each item a small act of hope that felt more like delusion. She climbed the stairs to Aaliyah's room and stood in the doorway. The space looked like a museum exhibit of a teenage life suddenly interrupted. Clothes draped over the desk chair. Textbooks stacked beside the bed, with homework assignments still tucked between pages. A coffee mug on the nightstand, its contents long since evaporated into a brown ring. Chelsea had been afraid to touch anything, as if disturbing the careful chaos might make Aaliyah's absence permanent. She entered now and sat on the bed, feeling the mattress dip under her weight. The comforter still held the faint scent of Aaliyah's coconut shampoo. Chelsea pulled a pillow into her lap and pressed her face against it, inhaling deeply. The fabric was cool against her cheeks. She stayed like that for several minutes, counting her breaths, trying to remember how to be a mother to a daughter who wished she was dead. A text message buzzed from her pocket. Chelsea pulled out her phone with trembling fingers. Her sister's name illuminated the screen. "How are you holding up?" Chelsea stared at the words until they blurred. Her thumbs hovered over the keyboard, but no response felt adequate. She set the phone face down on the nightstand and returned her attention to the room. Aaliyah's jewelry box sat on the dresser, its lid slightly ajar. Chelsea walked over and opened it fully. The mechanical ballerina inside no longer turned. The spring had broken years ago. But Aaliyah had kept it anyway. Small earrings and tangled necklaces filled the velvet compartments. Beneath the jewelry tray, Chelsea found a folded piece of paper. She recognized it immediately, the program from David's funeral. Her hands shook as she unfolded it. Someone had drawn on it, harsh pencil strokes that tore through the paper in places. Dark scribbles covered David's photo. Words were scratched into the margins, some crossed out so violently the page had ripped. Chelsea carried the program to the bedside lamp and held it under the light. Most of the writing was illegible, angry scratches rather than letters. But one phrase remained readable, carved deep into the paper with enough pressure to emboss the reverse side. "Why are you still here?" The program slipped from Chelsea's fingers and fluttered to the floor. She sank onto the bed again, her chest constricting until each breath required conscious effort. The walls of the room seemed to press inward. She grabbed her phone and stood, backing toward the door, needing space and air and distance from the physical evidence of her daughter's hatred. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall and dialed. The phone rang 4 times before voicemail picked up. David's voice, still unchanged on Aaliyah's phone after 8 months. Chelsea ended the call without leaving a message. She tried again immediately. Same result. She descended the stairs and paced through the living room, her footsteps echoing on the hardwood. The clock showed 9:23 p.m., 13 hours until Aaliyah returned. Chelsea moved to the kitchen and gripped the counter's edge, her knuckles whitening. The granite was cold and unyielding beneath her palms. Her phone rang, startling her so badly she nearly dropped it. An unknown number flashed on the screen. Chelsea answered, pressing the device against her ear with enough force to hurt. "Mrs. Morris? This is Owen from Riverside Youth Center. We need you to come down here right away." The fluorescent lights of the youth center's lobby hummed overhead, casting everything in harsh white brilliance. Chelsea pushed through the double doors and approached the front desk, where a young man with stretched earlobes and a nose ring looked up from his computer. His name tag confirmed he was Owen. "I'm Chelsea Morris. You called about my daughter." Owen stood quickly, his chair rolling backward and hitting the wall. He gestured toward a hallway to the left, already moving before Chelsea could respond. She followed him past bulletin boards covered in flyers for group therapy sessions and recreational activities. The smell of industrial cleaner mixed with cafeteria food permeated the corridor. Chelsea's hands trembled as Owen led her deeper into the facility. The corridor narrowed, the walls pressing closer with each step. Her shoes squeaked against the linoleum floor, the sound sharp and intrusive in the oppressive silence. Through a window on her right, she glimpsed a recreation room where teenagers sat in clusters, their faces illuminated by the blue glow of television screens. Owen stopped at a door marked Conference Room B and pulled it open without knocking. Inside, Aaliyah sat slouched in a metal folding chair, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. A woman in a navy blazer stood near the far wall, clipboard in hand. Her graying hair was pulled back in a severe bun that stretched the skin at her temples. "Ms. Morris, I'm Patricia Velasquez, the center's director." The woman extended her hand, but Chelsea's attention remained fixed on her daughter. Aaliyah's left eye was swollen, the skin around it already darkening to purple. Blood crusted beneath her nose, and her bottom lip was split. Her knuckles were raw and angry red. She didn't look up when Chelsea entered, didn't acknowledge her presence at all. Chelsea's stomach lurched. She moved forward instinctively, reaching toward Aaliyah's face, but her daughter jerked away so violently the chair legs scraped across the floor. "Don't touch me!" The words hit Chelsea like a physical blow. She pulled her hand back, holding it against her own chest, where her heart hammered beneath her ribs. Patricia stepped between them, her expression neutral but firm. There was an altercation during evening recreation. Aaliyah and another resident got into a physical confrontation. Patricia glanced at her clipboard. The other girl required medical attention. Aaliyah refused treatment. Chelsea's gaze swept over her daughter again, cataloging each visible injury. Her mind raced through questions. Who started it? Why? Was Aaliyah really okay? But the words stuck in her throat. Aaliyah stared at the opposite wall, her jaw clenched so tightly that the muscles jumped beneath her skin. "What happens now?" Chelsea managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Patricia set the clipboard on the table with a decisive thud. She folded her hands at her waist, adopting a posture Chelsea recognized from countless difficult conversations at work, the stance of someone about to deliver bad news with practiced professionalism. "Aaliyah's enrollment here is voluntary. She can leave at any time. However, given tonight's incident, we're recommending a more structured environment." Patricia paused, letting the implication sink in. "A residential treatment facility with 24-hour supervision." The room tilted. Chelsea gripped the back of the nearest chair, her fingernails digging into the cold metal. Residential treatment meant locked doors. It meant being unable to leave. It meant her daughter would be even further away. Aaliyah finally moved, uncrossing her arms and planting her palms on her thighs. She pushed herself up from the chair with such force it tipped backward and clattered to the floor. The noise reverberated off the walls. She turned to face Chelsea directly for the first time, and the hatred in her eyes was palpable. "This is what you wanted, right? To get rid of me?" Chelsea shook her head, but no words came. Her throat constricted, making it impossible to breathe properly. Aaliyah moved toward the door, her movements jerky and uncontrolled. Owen stepped aside to let her pass. "Aaliyah, wait!" Chelsea started after her, but Patricia's hand landed firmly on her shoulder. "Let her cool down. We need to discuss next steps." Through the small window in the door, Chelsea watched Aaliyah storm down the hallway, her silhouette growing smaller until it disappeared around a corner. The weight of Patricia's hand on her shoulder felt like an anchor dragging her down. She wanted to run after Aaliyah, to grab her and hold her and make her understand that none of this was what she wanted. But her feet remained rooted to the floor. Patricia released her grip and moved to the table, retrieving a folder from beneath her clipboard. She opened it, revealing forms and brochures with calming photographs of tree-lined campuses and smiling teenagers. The images looked staged, artificial. Chelsea couldn't imagine Aaliyah in any of those settings. "There are several facilities within a 2-hour drive. I can provide references and help coordinate intake assessments." Patricia's tone was efficient, detached. She'd had this conversation before, many times. Chelsea's vision blurred. She blinked rapidly, refusing to let tears fall in front of these strangers. Her chest felt compressed, as if someone had wrapped bands around her ribcage and was steadily tightening them. She thought of David, of how he would have handled this. He'd always known what to say to Aaliyah, how to reach her when she was angry or hurting. Chelsea had been the disciplinarian, the one who enforced rules and consequences. Now there was only her, and she was failing spectacularly. "Can I see her?" The question emerged broken and small. Patricia exchanged a glance with Owen, who shifted uncomfortably near the door. "I don't think that's advisable right now." Chelsea's hands clenched into fists so tight her nails carved crescents into her palms. The physical pain offered a strange comfort, something tangible to focus on instead of the horror spreading through her chest. She stood abruptly, the metal chair scraping against linoleum with a shriek that made Owen flinch. Patricia's clipboard tilted downward, a defensive gesture. The hallway outside stretched in both directions, institutional beige broken only by scuff marks and hand sanitizer dispensers mounted at regular intervals. Chelsea moved without deciding to move, her body carrying her away from the conference room and the sympathetic expressions that felt like knives. Her shoulders collided with the doorframe. She stumbled, caught herself against the wall, kept walking. Behind her, Patricia called something about scheduling and follow-up appointments. The words dissolved into background noise. Chelsea's vision had narrowed to a tunnel, showing only the path ahead. Her shoes squeaked against freshly waxed floors. Each step sent vibrations up through her shins, her knees, settling as a dull ache in her lower back, where the seatbelt had caught during the accident. The exit sign glowed red at the far end of the corridor. She focused on it like a beacon, counting her breaths, trying to slow the hammering in her chest. 12 steps, 15, 20. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed and flickered. One tube was dying, casting intermittent shadows that made her depth perception unreliable. A security guard emerged from a side office, radio crackling static against his hip. He glanced at Chelsea's face and immediately looked away, suddenly very interested in adjusting his belt. People always looked away. Since David died, since the funeral where Aaliyah had stood rigid and silent beside the casket, people couldn't meet Chelsea's eyes for more than a second or two. She pushed through the exit doors into afternoon sunshine that felt like an assault. The parking lot shimmered with heat waves rising off asphalt. Chelsea stopped at the edge of the concrete steps, gripping the metal railing hard enough that rust flaked off beneath her fingers. Her car sat in the third row, exactly where she'd parked it 3 hours ago. 3 hours that had split her life into before and after. The memory of Aaliyah's face when she'd said those words, "I wish you died," played on repeat behind Chelsea's eyes. Not shouted in adolescent rage, but delivered with flat, dead certainty. Her daughter's jaw had been set, her gaze direct and unwavering. She'd meant it. Every syllable had carried the weight of genuine conviction. Chelsea descended the steps, each one requiring conscious effort. Her legs felt disconnected from her body, puppeteered by some external force. Sweat gathered at her hairline, trickling down her temples. She'd forgotten her sunglasses inside, but the thought of going back made her stomach lurch. The car's interior was furnace hot. She slid into the driver's seat and immediately scalded her thigh on the sun-heated leather. The pain barely registered. She sat motionless, hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, staring through the windshield at nothing. The position was muscle memory from driving lessons decades ago, from teaching Aaliyah to drive just last year when everything was still manageable. Her phone buzzed in her purse. She ignored it. It buzzed again, insistent. On the third buzz, she dug it out with clumsy fingers. A text from her sister. "How did it go?" Chelsea's thumb hovered over the keyboard. How could she possibly compress this catastrophe into a text message? She locked the phone instead, tossed it onto the passenger seat where David used to sit. The leather there was less worn, faded differently. She'd been driving alone for 8 months, but still couldn't bring herself to adjust his seat settings or remove the air freshener he'd insisted on keeping clipped to the vent. The folder Patricia had given her sat on the passenger floor, glossy brochures spilling out. Whispering Pines Academy, Horizon Treatment Center, New Dawn Residential Facility. All euphemisms for the same thing. Places where troubled teenagers went when their parents couldn't handle them anymore. Places that cost more per month than Chelsea's mortgage, that required insurance pre-authorizations and intake assessments and family therapy sessions she couldn't imagine surviving. She started the engine. Cold air blasted from the vents, gradually pushing back the oppressive heat. Her hands trembled on the wheel, making the key jangle against the ignition. She needed to drive home, needed to call her insurance company, needed to research these facilities and figure out which one would be least traumatic for Aaliyah. The list of needs stretched endless and impossible. Instead, she drove to the cemetery. The route was automatic now, muscle memory overriding conscious thought. Left at the intersection, right past the elementary school where Aaliyah had once performed in holiday concerts, straight through downtown past the coffee shop where Chelsea and David had spent Sunday mornings reading newspapers and stealing bites from each other's pastries. All of it felt like footage from someone else's life. The cemetery gates stood open, black iron scrollwork creating patterns of shadow across the entrance road. Chelsea's tires crunched over gravel. She parked beneath an oak tree that had dropped acorns across the hood of her car during previous visits. The groundskeeper had placed fresh flowers on several nearby graves, their colors vibrant against granite headstones. David's plot was halfway up a gentle slope, beneath a maple tree that would turn brilliant gold in autumn. Chelsea had picked the spot because he'd always loved fall, had proposed to her in October surrounded by falling leaves. She'd thought the location would bring comfort. Instead, it just made her notice the changing seasons, the relentless forward march of time that was carrying her further from when he'd been alive. She stood before the headstone, reading the inscription she'd memorized. Her knees buckled. She sank onto the grass, not caring that moisture from yesterday's rain immediately soaked through her pants. The dampness was grounding, real. "She hates me." The words emerged hoarse, directed at polished granite. "Our daughter hates me, David. She actually said she wishes I'd died instead of you." A breeze moved through the maple branches, sending a few early fallen leaves spiraling down. One landed on Chelsea's shoulder. She picked it off with mechanical precision, tracing its veins with her thumbnail until the delicate structure tore. Chelsea's fingers dug into the soft earth beside the headstone, grass blades crushing between her knuckles. The dirt embedded itself beneath her nails as she clawed deeper, needing to feel something solid, something that would anchor her to this moment. Her chest heaved with breaths that wouldn't satisfy her lungs, each inhale catching halfway, as though her ribcage had forgotten how to expand. She lurched to her feet, stumbling backward until her spine hit the maple tree. The bark bit through her thin sweater, rough and unforgiving. She pressed harder against it, welcoming the discomfort, the way it demanded her attention. Her palms flattened against the trunk behind her, and she pushed with all her weight, as if she could merge with the wood, disappear into something that didn't feel this consuming ache. A scream built in her throat, clawing upward with violent urgency. She clamped her jaw shut, grinding her molars together until pain shot through her temples. The sound stayed trapped inside, vibrating through her skull, filling every cavity with pressure that made her eyes water. Her body shook with the effort of containing it, muscles tensing from her neck down through her shoulders, her arms, her clenched fists. She shoved away from the tree and began pacing the length of David's grave. 3 steps one direction, pivot, 3 steps back. Her shoes left impressions in the rain-softened ground. She counted each turn, each revolution, using numbers to contain the chaos threatening to split her open. 10 laps, 20. Her legs burned, but she kept moving, faster now, her breathing ragged and harsh. Chelsea dropped to her knees again, this time with force, the impact sending a jolt through her thighs. She reached for the flowers the groundskeeper had placed on a neighboring grave, bright yellow chrysanthemums in a plastic vase. Her fingers wrapped around the container, squeezing until the thin plastic buckled and cracked. Water spilled across her hand, cold and shocking. She hurled the vase across the cemetery. It tumbled end over end through the air, flowers separating from stems, petals scattering like confetti. The container struck a distant headstone with a hollow thunk that echoed across the hillside. The sound wasn't enough. It didn't match the magnitude of what was tearing through her chest. Her hands found a fallen branch near the maple's roots, as thick as her wrist and stripped of bark by weather and time. She gripped it with both hands, feeling the smooth wood against her palms. Then she swung it against the maple trunk with all her strength. The impact reverberated up her arms, into her shoulders. Again and again. Each strike sent vibrations through her bones, a percussion that drowned out thought. The branch splintered on the 5th hit, fragmenting into pieces that scattered across the grave. Chelsea stood there gasping, staring at the jagged stub still clutched in her right hand. A splinter had driven itself into the meat of her thumb, a bright bead of blood welling around it. She sank down once more, sitting cross-legged now, cradling her injured hand. The pain was specific, manageable, so much simpler than everything else. She pulled the splinter out with her teeth, spitting it into the grass, then pressed her thumb against her pants until the bleeding slowed. The rage hadn't left. It sat coiled in her stomach, dense and hot, but the explosive need to destroy something had dulled to a smolder. Chelsea's gaze fixed on the headstone again, on David's name carved in granite that would outlast her, outlast Simone, outlast their pain. "I can't do this anymore." Her voice emerged barely above a whisper, scraped raw. "I don't know how to reach her. I don't know how to make her understand. I would have taken your place in a heartbeat." The cemetery offered no response, just the distant sound of a lawnmower starting up near the maintenance shed and the continued rustle of leaves overhead. Chelsea wiped her face with her uninjured hand, realizing only then that tears had been streaming down her cheeks the entire time. Silent and unacknowledged. She forced herself upright, joints protesting, every muscle in her body suddenly aware of the violence she'd just enacted. Her clothes were filthy, streaked with dirt and grass stains, her hands scratched and dirty. She looked like someone who'd been in a fight. In a way, she had been, with herself, with circumstances, with the daughter whose words had driven her here. Chelsea walked back to her car slowly, each step deliberate. Her keys had fallen from her pocket during the struggle, and she had to search the grass around the oak tree before finding them nestled against a root. She unlocked the door and slid behind the wheel, catching sight of herself in the rearview mirror. The woman staring back looked haunted, eyes red-rimmed and wild, hair tangled with bits of leaf and twig. But something had shifted in her expression. The desperation had hardened into something else. Determination, maybe, or simply the recognition that breaking down wouldn't bring David back or repair what had shattered between her and Simone. She started the engine, hands still trembling slightly on the steering wheel, and pulled away from the cemetery gates. Chelsea drove to the community center on Ashland Boulevard, the building she'd passed 100 times without entering during the 3 years since the accident. The parking lot was nearly full despite the late afternoon hour. She sat in her car for 10 minutes, watching people filter in and out through the glass doors, each one carrying their own weight of grief and recovery. Her reflection in the side mirror showed the evidence of her cemetery breakdown. Dirt smudged across her forehead, grass stains marking her jacket like battle scars. She pulled wet wipes from the glove compartment and cleaned her face methodically, working around the bruised knuckles and scraped palms. The physical pain anchored her, kept her from turning the key and driving away. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed overhead, washing the corridor in sterile brightness. A bulletin board near the entrance displayed flyers for various support groups: addiction recovery, domestic violence survivors, parenting classes. The one she needed was tucked in the corner. Grief counseling, Tuesdays and Thursdays, 5:30 p.m., room 107. She followed the signs down a hallway that smelled of industrial cleaner and old coffee. Through the window of room 107, she could see people already seated in a circle. 12 folding chairs, 8 of them occupied. A woman with gray-streaked hair and kind eyes stood near a small table arranging paper cups and a coffee carafe. Chelsea's hand rested on the door handle. Her pulse hammered in her throat, and her legs felt suddenly liquid, unreliable. Every instinct screamed at her to leave, to return to the safety of isolation and familiar pain. But she thought of the hole she'd tried to dig in David's grave, the raw desperation that had driven her to her knees in the dirt. She thought of Simone's bedroom door, perpetually closed, and the silence that had calcified between them like scar tissue over a wound that wouldn't heal. She thought of the 3 years she'd spent dying by increments, honoring David's memory through her own gradual disappearance. The door swung open under her hand. "Come in, please." The gray-haired woman gestured to an empty chair. "We're just getting started." "I'm Patricia, the facilitator." Chelsea moved to the circle, lowering herself into the metal chair that creaked under her weight. The other participants glanced at her briefly. A teenage boy with acne scars and haunted eyes, a middle-aged man in a business suit with his tie loosened, a young woman clutching tissues, others whose faces blurred together in Chelsea's peripheral vision. "We have someone new joining us today," Patricia said, her voice gentle but not pitying. "Would you like to introduce yourself?" Chelsea's mouth felt dry, her tongue thick and useless. She swallowed hard, forced herself to meet Patricia's patient gaze. "I'm Chelsea. My husband died 3 years ago. Car accident. I was driving." The words landed in the room like stones dropped into still water, spreading ripples of recognition across the faces around her. No one looked away. No one offered hollow platitudes. The teenage boy nodded once, a gesture of understanding that needed no translation. Patricia took a seat, completing the circle. "Thank you for sharing that, Chelsea. That takes courage, especially the first time." She poured water into a paper cup and passed it across. "We don't push anyone to talk before they're ready, but we also believe that speaking our truth, however painful, is part of the healing process." The water was lukewarm, but Chelsea drank it gratefully, buying herself time. Her hands had finally stopped shaking, though the scraped knuckles throbbed steadily. The session continued around her. The man in the business suit talked about his wife's cancer, how he'd watched her deteriorate over 18 months, how guilt consumed him because part of him had felt relief when it finally ended. The young woman described losing her infant daughter to SIDS, the empty nursery she couldn't bring herself to dismantle. Their words washed over Chelsea, each story a mirror reflecting different angles of the same bottomless grief. When Patricia turned to her again, Chelsea found herself speaking without planning to. "My daughter told me she wishes I died instead of him." The room absorbed this confession, held it without judgment. Patricia leaned forward slightly, her expression steady and attentive. "And you came here today anyway?" Patricia said. "That matters." Chelsea felt something crack open in her chest, a pressure valve releasing years of accumulated poison. Tears came again, but quieter this time, less violent than the storm at the cemetery. The young woman beside her silently offered a box of tissues. Chelsea took one, then another, pressing them against her eyes. The session lasted another 40 minutes. Chelsea didn't speak again, but she listened, truly listened, to the chorus of loss surrounding her. When it ended, she remained seated while others filed out, their movements slow and deliberate, like people learning to walk after a long illness. Patricia approached, holding a photocopied schedule. "Same time next week?" Chelsea stared at the paper, its edges slightly blurred through her still watery vision. She folded it carefully, tucking it into her jacket pocket next to her car keys. "Same time," she said. 6 months later, Chelsea stood in the community center kitchen, her hands dusted white with flour, as she kneaded dough for the grief group's monthly potluck. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching particles of flour suspended in the air like tiny stars. She worked the dough with practiced motions, folding and pressing, the rhythm meditative and grounding. Patricia entered carrying a box of paper plates, setting them on the counter beside the mixing bowls. Their weekly sessions had evolved into this: shared meals, quiet companionship, the gradual rebuilding of something resembling hope. "Your bread is becoming legendary," Patricia said, unpacking the supplies. Chelsea smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes now. She shaped the dough into loaves, placing them carefully in greased pans. The ache of loss remained constant, a dull throb beneath her sternum, but she'd learned to carry it differently, not pushing it down, not letting it consume her, just acknowledging its presence like an old injury that flared in certain weather. The other group members filtered in throughout the afternoon. The young woman who'd lost her daughter, Amanda, brought a casserole. The elderly widower arrived with store-bought cookies and a shy grin. They arranged dishes on the long tables, their movements coordinated through months of shared Thursdays. Chelsea pulled the bread from the oven, its crust golden brown and crackling. The scent filled the room, yeast and warmth and something like comfort. She set the loaves on cooling racks, watching steam rise from the splits in the crust. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from an unknown number. She wiped her hands on her apron before checking the screen. "Mom, can we talk?" "Melody." Chelsea's fingers trembled slightly as she held the phone. 3 months of silence since their last attempted conversation, which had ended in slammed doors and bitter accusations. She'd stopped reaching out after that, giving her daughter space even though the distance had carved her hollow. She typed slowly. "When?" The response came quickly. "Tomorrow? Coffee shop on Henderson?" Chelsea's heart hammered against her ribs. She steadied herself against the counter, breathing through the surge of anxiety and fragile hope. Patricia glanced over, reading something in her expression, but didn't intrude with questions. 11 a.m. I'll be there." She set the phone down and returned to slicing bread, though her hands shook enough that Patricia gently took the knife and finished the task. The potluck continued around her, conversations flowing, laughter punctuating the ambient noise. Chelsea forced herself to participate, to stay present rather than spiraling into speculation about tomorrow. The coffee shop smelled like espresso and cinnamon when Chelsea arrived 15 minutes early the next morning. She ordered chamomile tea, her stomach too unsettled for caffeine, and claimed a corner table away from the lunch crowd. Her fingers traced the rim of her cup, round and round, wearing a path in the condensation. Melody appeared in the doorway at exactly 11. Taller than Chelsea remembered, though only weeks had passed. Her daughter had inherited Marcus's height, his sharp cheekbones. She wore a university sweatshirt, and her hair pulled back in a messy bun. They locked eyes across the crowded shop. Melody's expression flickered. Uncertainty, something like fear, something like hope. She approached slowly, dropping into the chair across from Chelsea without ordering anything. Neither spoke immediately. The silence stretched, fragile as spun glass. Chelsea resisted the urge to fill it with apologies or explanations. Dr. Reynolds, her therapist now, in addition to the group sessions, had coached her on this. Let Melody set the pace. "I've been seeing someone," Melody finally said, "a counselor at school." Chelsea nodded, keeping her hands wrapped around her teacup to stop them from reaching across the table. "She helped me understand some things." Melody's voice cracked slightly. "About grief. About how I was using you as a target for everything I couldn't say to Dad." A tear slid down Chelsea's cheek. She didn't wipe it away. "What I said that day..." Melody's own tears started streaming freely. "Mom, I didn't mean... I was so angry at everything, and you were there, and he wasn't, and I know, baby." Chelsea finally released her cup, extending one hand palm up on the table. "I know." Melody stared at the offered hand for a long moment before placing her own on top. Her fingers felt cold, trembling slightly. Chelsea wrapped them in both of hers, holding gently, the way she'd held them when Melody was small and scared of thunderstorms. "I miss him so much," Melody whispered. "Me too." They sat like that, hands clasped across the scarred coffee shop table, while the world moved around them. Chelsea memorized the moment, her daughter's face, older and harder than before, but still her baby girl. The weight of Melody's hand in hers. The sound of the espresso machine hissing steam. The second hand of the wall clock marking time that suddenly felt less like an enemy. "This doesn't fix everything," Melody said eventually. "No," Chelsea agreed. "But it's a start." Chelsea stood in her bedroom later that evening, looking at the boxes she'd finally sealed that afternoon. Marcus's clothes, his books, the cologne that still held his scent. Not erasing him, but making space for survival. For whatever came next. She'd kept his wedding ring, his favorite watch, the leather jacket he'd worn on their first date. Those would go to Melody when she was ready. The rest would be donated, given new purpose with people who needed them. The cemetery lay 15 minutes away. Chelsea grabbed her keys and drove there as sunset painted the sky orange and purple. She parked in the familiar spot and walked to Marcus's grave, her footsteps steady on the grass. Someone had left fresh flowers, probably Marcus's mother. Chelsea knelt beside the headstone, running her fingers over the engraved letters of his name. "Melody and I talked today," she said quietly. "Really talked. We're going to try, Marcus. Both of us are trying." A breeze rustled the trees overhead. Chelsea tilted her face toward it, feeling the cooling air against her skin. The grief remained, would always remain, but somehow it felt less suffocating now, like she'd learned to breathe around it. She stayed until the last light faded from the sky, then drove home through streets now familiar again. Her house glowed warm in the darkness. Inside, she made chamomile tea and sat at the kitchen table, opening her laptop to the online support forum Patricia had recommended. She typed slowly. 6 months ago, I couldn't imagine surviving this. Today, I had coffee with my daughter. To anyone just starting this journey, it gets different. Not easier, not better, just different. Keep breathing. Keep showing up. That's enough. Chelsea posted the message and closed the laptop. Tomorrow she'd return to work, continue therapy, attend her Thursday group. She'd text Melody about getting dinner next week. She'd keep putting one foot in front of the other, carrying Marcus's memory forward while learning to live in his absence. The road ahead stretched uncertain and painful. But for the first time since the accident, Chelsea felt something beyond mere survival. Something tentative and fragile, but undeniably present. Hope. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.